Hello everybody and welcome back. This should be a familiar face from a couple videos back. We have the Dymac AM5 tuner back on the bench, and by request we're going to do the Meducci upgrade on this one as well so that it can receive AM stereo. Now it's going to be a lot easier than that Sansui TUX1 was, because this thing's really kind of set up for it, so it shouldn't be too difficult. So if that sounds interesting to you, stay tuned, and that's what we're going to be doing. Okay, so we got this one all connected and working. It was pretty easy. And you can see I just mounted it back here on a single little standoff. And then this little cover back here was a perfect little place where you could take that little cover panel off and just replace it with a little panel with the two RCA jacks for the outputs. The power supply comes in right here, and you can kind of see, we'll look at the bottom here in a minute, but you can kind of see it just comes straight across and goes underneath and over to the power supply board. And our IF pickoff is right here. Now, that's what I want to talk about on this one. If you recall, if you watched the video on the Sansui TUX1 where I installed one of these, it had a very convenient IF output that was really designed for a device similar to this. This one, however, did not. It has a very, very strong IF signal, and it was so strong that I probably could have gotten along with just using what's called a gimmick capacitor. A gimmick capacitor, for those of you who are new to radio, is where you just take a piece of wire and you place that wire in close proximity to the signal that you want to couple to. And there's a capacitive coupling that takes place between that piece of wire and the signal. And by moving the wire around, though, it can change the signal strength and so forth. So it was used in old radios like the Hallicrafters. I think the S38 was their little entry-level model. They did that similar thing to that for the BFO, to be able to listen to Morse code and so forth. But anyway, getting a little bit off topic, I opted not to do that with this. And when I connected into the actual IF, what ended up happening was the signal was way too strong, and it was really swamping this module out. So it was getting terrible distortion, and overdrive. So what I ended up doing to fix the problem was I wanted to have a direct coupling to the IF and not use a gimmick wire, but I wanted it to be very loosely coupled. So here's what we did. I'll show you here. So if we look at the little schematic of this module, you can see right here is your intermediate frequency input, and this is where you would connect your IF of your receiver into the module. And it goes through a 22 nanofarad capacitor. Now that 22 nanofarad for RF, that's a very big value. And the reason they did that is so that if you have a very weak signal, it will allow the majority of that signal to get through. What I ended up doing, believe it or not, is I removed this 22 nanofarad capacitor, and I replaced it with a 2 picofarad capacitor. That's right, just a 2 picofarad. That's all it needed, and the signal is absolutely perfect. And if we focus in here, hopefully it'll get close enough to be able to see it. It's this little capacitor right here, little tiny thing. And that's all you need. That's all I needed to do. I desoldered the 22 nanofarad, removed it, and just replaced it with this 2 picofarad. So just so you know, if any of you decide to install one of these Meducci AM stereo modules in one of your receivers, if you're having a problem with the signal swamping out the module, you can replace this capacitor to attenuate that somewhat. You'll have to experiment because it really depends on how strong the signal is and so forth. Now, this little schematic that I got when I did the original video on the AM5 actually had this already written on it. And it's very hard to see. You really have to focus in closely, but you can kind of see there where it says Meducci gray wire, and it says you connect it either here or here. And this is where I did end up connecting it, and we'll see it in a second here. But again, this is a very, very strong signal. Now, there was no notes about this other than that. The other two places that we're connecting was down here. And this is just the power supply, the regulator for your plus 12 volts. And they were just picking the 12 volts off of this area here. And I'll show you that here in a second as well. But really, there's only 3 wire connections. Your positive and negative for your power supply, and then your IF. Now, these other wires, you have the 2 wires here, and these are the outputs through these little coupling capacitors. And they go to a little coax, and they go over to the right and left channel outputs. And then you have a green wire and a yellow wire that I put in here. And those just go to the LED. And once again, what I did with the LED is, if I can show you, you can see here's the panel meter, this white thing right here. This is the back of the panel meter. It's illuminated by this incandescent bulb. And I attached a blue LED right here, just like we did on the Sansui. And by the way, guys, any of you that watched that video, I told you I would show you that, and then I forgot. This is very similar to how I did it on the Sansui. By placing this LED right next to the window of the panel light, you can kind of see the bezel will light up blue whenever you tune into a stereo station. So that's how we did that. And you can just kind of follow the wire around, and it just goes over to the module. So let's flip it upside down and look at the couple of connections on the bottom. So looking at the underside here, you can see the power supply board. So this is the underneath of the power supply board, your transformers over here. And all we did was we just tapped off across where that capacitor would be connected for the plus 12 volts. So there's your plus 12 volts line there, and your minus, your ground. And you can see it just goes up through the wire. Now, looking at the IF section, you can see right here is where we connected, and this is the underneath of the IF transformer, the second IF. And you can see just a little tiny wire going in there. And that's all there is to it. Very, very simple. So let's connect this up first of all and see if it tunes. And then I'm having a little bit of problems with the C-Cuff AM transmitter. It's very, very susceptible to any type of power supply noise. That's why when they ship it, it comes with a battery pack rather than a little wall wart adapter. And short of using my really high precision power supply to provide a real clean 5 volts, just about anything you connect other than batteries will introduce a lot of hum and buzz and noise to the signal. Even my MP3 player, when I connect it up, if it's using a wall wart, I have to even run that on a battery to get it. So we're going to improve that board a little bit in a later video and see if we can make things a little bit more stable with it. It's good enough for me to set up a carrier signal so that we can trip the stereo light for the Meducci module, so we can at least test to make sure. But for sound quality, I was able to kind of get everything just right, and it sounds really amazing. But it's kind of difficult. So we're just going to listen to this as is. And, you know, the demodulator and decoder in this Meducci board actually has a very good sound quality. So it even just for mono broadcasts, the sound quality for an AM radio is very, very good. I was very impressed with it. So let's see what's going on, and hopefully all this will work. Okay, we're all put back together, and you know, really, really frustrates me. There is an AM stereo and it plays really good classic rock and oldies all day long. And it's only maybe 30 or 40 miles from my house. It's a really good station, but it is a very low power station, and they only transmit in Sequam stereo during the day. And I've tried everything to receive that station, and as it turns out, there are 3 low power AM stations that are all using that same frequency, and they're all, separated only, couple hundred miles each. So it's really hard to receive that station. But I am going to kind of drive around and see if I can pick it up sometime. We'll take a little ride. Maybe we'll do a field trip. But here's the radio. Let's check it out. Okay, guys, I hope this works. Let me move the camera up just a little bit. And you can see now that we have the DA7 and we have the AM5 hooked up. And I have the transmitter. We did some upgrades to it, and I have it clear across the room. And what you're going to hear is how terrible it is right now, because I do not have a matched antenna. We really have a problem with that. I'm going to have to make a little antenna matching unit to get it to work. But proof of concept anyway. When I first turn the volume up here, what you're going to notice is that it's going to be real staticky and terrible. I'm going to walk across the room after we get this going, and I'm going to grab the antenna with my hand. My hand is going to kind of capacitively couple and actually make it match a little bit better, and you'll hear it get a lot quieter. Won't be perfect, but it'll get quieter. You'll see the little stereo indicator. It's already on. You can see it's kind of that blue glow there. And then I'll turn on some wonderful YouTube library music. I know you guys love that. So do I. And we can kind of listen to this thing in stereo. I have the stereo microphone turned on that's built into the camera. So we'll see what it sounds like. If this nightmare works, I'll be shocked and amazed. But hey, that's what this is all about, right? Where it's all about experimenting. So let's turn the volume up, get ready for some crackly, nasty sounds, and then you'll hear when I grab the antenna with my hand, and then you'll hear the music start. So here we go. Okay, I'm back over here at the camera, and you can hear without me holding the antenna how staticky everything sounds. If I go back and grab the antenna again, you'll hear. And by the way, the DA7 does work. If you rotate the tuning on it, you could see the needle dropping as I go on and off peak. So this is all working. So everything works pretty good. Alright, and there, excuse the picture of my shirt in the way. So there we go. Everything's working here. We're going to bundle this up, and this is ready to go back to the happy owner. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put that little transmitter on the bench and kind of show you. If you remember the last time we saw it, it was just a circuit board with battery pack laying on the kind of laying on the bench. So we've cleaned it up a little bit. So let's get that on the bench and look at that next. Okay, here we are. This is the final product here of the C-Cuff AM stereo transmitter that we were just using. And again, the key to any transmitter, and especially any very low output, low power transmitter like the ones that are legal, that you don't need a license, which is 100 milliwatts into maximum of a 3-meter antenna element. That's not a very good playing field to be in to get any kind of output. But believe it or not, if this had a properly matched antenna on it, it would be more than enough power to really transmit pretty far. And that's one of the reasons that, when the FCC put regulations on this, the reason that they were so adamant about the length of the radiating element also, or the antenna as we would call it. Because even though this is very low output, under the correct circumstances, you can still project a signal very far. Anyway, we'll talk more about antennas here in a little bit. Let's look inside this first of all, what we did. And if you look inside, let's move the camera over top to a top-down view. Okay, hopefully we could see a little bit better here. So here's the board mounted inside here. All I did was just kind of put it in one of these aluminum chassis boxes. And if you notice, I mounted it with the box with the open side up. So this would normally be the bottom plate. I used it as a top cover. That way we can take it apart, and if we have to make adjustments, we can. So let's talk about a couple things how this works. So first of all, I switched out the battery pack, these regular standard batteries, and it's a 12-volt pack, and it just uses standard AA cells. And I swapped it out for these 18650 lithium-ion cells. First of all, they have really high capacity. Second of all, they're rechargeable. And they hold their voltage very well all the way till they're discharged. If you're going to do this, make sure you use the cells that have built-in protection for overcharge and for under voltage. You can buy these as just raw cells. If you do, you're going to have an external protection board on it. Or you can get the ones, you see the little bump up here. There's a little circuit board on the top of these that prevents these from being overcharged. Now there is a little charging module, a tiny little postage stamp sized module that I ordered, and it will allow us to be able to charge these batteries in the case, but it hasn't arrived yet. I ordered it from eBay, so of course it takes weeks to come in sometimes. So for the moment, to recharge these, we'll have to remove them, but I have a feeling one charge on these will last a really long time on these. The other thing is these don't leak, and they have a very long shelf life, and they can hold their charge for a very long time. If you leave these inside here, you always run that risk of the batteries leaking, because this isn't going to get a whole lot of use except for when we're testing things. Now, it's a very simple thing. You have your inputs for your right and left channels, and you can see they just go right into the board. There's actually a little through hole that you can solder those right in there. On the front, I just took the LED. It used to have that little red LED for power on indication, and I just relocated it to the front of the chassis and put a power on and off switch. And that's just in line with the batteries. Nothing complicated in this thing. It's on rubber feet. So I put it up on rubber feet. The whole chassis is at the same ground plane as the ground plane of this circuit board. And I added a little terminal post, and if you noticed, it's connected directly to chassis ground, so that if we want to add an earth ground here, this is where you would earth ground it. Or you could just leave the rubber feet and leave it isolated. That's really important. And then I just use a standard BNC for the RF output. And the reason that I did that is this thing only runs at 1.25 megahertz, which is towards the top of the AM broadcast band. So it's not real high frequency. So this is more than adequate. You don't need any kind of special connector, for that frequency. Now, couple things about this board. This oscillator chip, or this oscillator crystal, partially is what's used to set up the transmit frequency. And the way I got it from C-Cuff was, Chris Cuff, was set up for the 1.25 megahertz, which works out really well for where I live and so forth down here. Because there's really not, there's a 1.2 megahertz, there's a pretty strong station, but at 1.25, we really don't have anything, so it's not bad, especially down here. Now, this little grain of wheat bulb, and I'll show it to you right here. You notice that's a little incandescent bulb. That is a very important thing. When you connect, because this is on the AM broadcast band, it requires a very, very large radiating element, because the lower you go in transmit frequency, the longer the wavelength is, and the longer the wavelength is, the longer the radiating element you need to be resonant. Now, there are things we can do to correct that, but we'll get more into that here in a minute. But what we're talking about is when the antenna is not resonant. In other words, if it will not resonate at the transmit frequency. So this thing is transmitting at 1.25 megahertz, or 1250 kilohertz AM. And if the antenna is not resonant at 1250 kilohertz, it's going to reflect a lot of the power, if not most of the power, back into the transmitting element, which is this little transistor right here. That's a bad thing. Number one, it's very bad, very hard on the finals. Now, this is a 100 milliwatt unit. It probably wouldn't damage this transistor. It would cause it to get warm, but definitely not a good thing. Sorry, I'm having my morning coffee here too. So what this bulb does is it acts like a dim bulb. You know how we use a dim bulb tester? Well, that's kind of what this is. This is a current limiting bulb. And in a perfect world, this bulb should be very, very dim. But as you improperly load this thing, the bulb will light up and it'll take the excess current. But what that means is most of your RF signal is going into that bulb and not into your antenna. So, you know, a lot of these small transmitters, it's not just this one, all the ones that are out there, all of them, 100%, all the AM transmitters out there, they cannot work properly without the right matched antenna. Now, we're limited to 3 meters in the United States. We can't have a radiating element or an antenna longer than 3 meters, or about 10 feet. And they do that so that you can't transmit over top of commercial broadcast. They purposely are limiting us to how far we can transmit. So now let's talk a little bit about the antennas. So right here is the antenna that I'm using with this box. And you can see it doesn't extend very far. It's maybe about 36 inches long, you know, not even 1 meter long. And it's got center loading on it, and it's really designed for working up in the VHF band. And this is actually a scanner antenna. This came from Radio Shack before they went out of business. I've had it for a long time. It's just convenient because it just plugs into a BNC and kind of sticks up like that, and it works. The problem is it is not anywhere near resonant at at 1.25 megahertz. And I know you guys are all going to be doing the 1.21 gigawatt thing. So yeah, let's get the laughing over with. 1.21 gigawatts. All right, so we plug this in here, and if we turn it on, you can see the bulb does illuminate a little bit. And this little pot right here controls your RF output power. And a lot of people believe, you know, I want more, you know, this is real big in the CB Citizens Band radio community, you know. I want more power, more power. To be honest, I could put all the watts I want out of this thing, and it's not going to make a hill of beans worth of difference, because most of it is being reflected back into the transmitter, or into this bulb in this case, because, I'll shut this off, no need to kill the batteries, because the antenna is grossly mismatched to the transmitter. So, you don't need a lot of power. When you think about it, the Voyager space probe is still transmitting, and we're still receiving it. It's going to go out in a little while. It's coming to the end of its life. But think about that. You have a teeny tiny little transmitter, and it's only a few watts. It's not very powerful, with a relatively small antenna, because think about it, the Voyager probe is not that big, and yet it can transmit all the way from where it is now, which is outside of our solar system, to the Earth, and penetrate through our atmosphere and everything. It's really not about power. Now, of course, through the vacuum of space, the signal never gets attenuated, because there's nothing to attenuate it, or very little to attenuate it. But here on Earth, we have a lot of things in our atmosphere that will, attenuate that signal. And so the antenna needs to be resonant. And quite honestly, if you had a half wave or even a quarter wave length of antenna, and that antenna was perfectly resonant, 100% perfectly resonant with this frequency, in this case 1250 kilohertz, and the carrier line, the wire going from this transistor, this final output, to the radiating element has absolutely zero loss, you would be shocked and amazed how far this 100 milliwatts would transmit. And that's why a lot of people want to put a lot of money into buying linear amplifiers, or having people go in and do the golden tweaker thing to their CBs to crank it up louder or more power. You're doing nothing. You're better to put your money and your effort into a better antenna system always. It's just kind of like people talk about amplifiers too. You can have the greatest amplifier in the world, but if you don't have very efficient, good quality speakers, the amplifier is worthless. So again, the speakers and the antenna, that's what everything is feeding into. Very important. So what we're going to do is later on, and I don't have time to do it right now, there's so many things have to go on the bench, but in a perfect world, rather than plugging this antenna directly into here, we're going to come out of this and we're going to go into another little box that we're going to build, and it's going to be an antenna matching unit. And what it's going to do is it's going to make this antenna act as if it is resonant at 1250 kilohertz. Now, there's a drawback to that, because you're still not going to radiate 100% of the power out into the atmosphere, because that matching network is going to absorb some of that energy and dissipate it. But it is going to allow you to have very light loading. This thing is going to operate, it's going to think that there's a resonant antenna attached to it, because there will be a resonant circuit attached to it. So that'll make that impedance look proper to what this thing was designed for. And in theory, you can turn this power up, to its normal level, and this bulb should not illuminate very brightly, and you should be able to get 100% of that power out of or at least into that circuit, and get a good percentage of it to radiate from the antenna. Now, once again, if an antenna is not the proper wavelength of the signal that you want to transmit, you're never going to get a whole lot of it to radiate. It's just the laws of physics. It's just the way it works. But I thought that would be interesting to talk about, since we have this little transmitter here. A lot of people build these, or they purchase these, and they get very frustrated because they say it doesn't work, or they get all kinds of noise. It's not the transmitter. It's most of the time it's the antenna that you're using and that it's mismatched. And the other thing is, if you notice, I grabbed that antenna with my hand, and you notice that that signal got really clear and much stronger. Well, it's because I was acting like an antenna matching device in some way. Of course, it still wasn't perfect and it still wasn't resonant, but it was closer to being resonant than without me touching it and without me having that adding that reactance. Now, again, guys, never grab an antenna element while it's transmitting if you don't know what you're doing. Even a Citizens Band CB radio at 5 watts of input power can give you an RF burn if you grab that antenna element while it's transmitting. It is possible, and it has happened. People have done that. And an RF burn is extremely painful, and it takes a very long time to heal. So I don't recommend doing any of that unless you understand and know what you are doing. This is a tiny little 100 milliwatt transmitter. I knew what I was doing. So, but I just have to put that disclaimer in there because I don't want somebody going out there and grabbing an antenna that they don't know, what's connected to it, and thinking they're going to play around with the signal. But anyway, we're going to do that later on. So this is what it looks like. This is a really nice little transmitter. I mean, it is high fidelity. It does sound amazing when it does work. I really do want to finish this project one day and get a matched antenna on there so that we can actually use it in the shop here more often, because it will work just as well with mono signals as it will with stereo. You don't have to have a stereo receiver. And I do have a very nice Carver stereo AM receiver that'll do stereo AM that I'm going to be putting on the bench here in a while, probably this summer, and you'll be seeing this more, and hopefully this will be completed at that time. Anyway, just some interesting things, and again, I have a lot of other things coming up here. Don't know how I'm going to get them all done. I know a lot of you have emailed me that you'd like me to look at your receiver or amplifier, whatever it may be, radio. And I just at this point in time don't have any more free bench time. Work has been busier than projected, which is a good thing, but it does cut into this, and of course, with a family, you have all those obligations too. So this is just a limited time thing for me, but we'll try to get to as much stuff as we can. Anyway, thank you all. I hope this was interesting to you, how it works. I know I didn't get a whole lot into how Sequam stereo works, but there's a lot of articles. You can actually go onto Wikipedia and just look up Sequam, C-Q-U-A-M, and it'll give you a pretty good idea of how it works. There are some pretty good articles out there, and it'll actually, if you read enough, you'll find out that the frequency response of Sequam AM stereo is actually much better than a standard AM broadcast. And how they do that and everything is in the article. So anyway, thanks again, and more to come later. Peace, joy, happiness, and good health in your lives. Thank you all. I know I got some donations and a few things like that, which I super duper appreciate. Again, it will all go towards projects and towards the channel. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for the wonderful comments. And, I've been trying to get to the emails once every other week, it's been working out pretty good. But if you email me, I will try to get back to you. It just might be a couple weeks before I can respond because I just have limited time for that. Anyway, thank you all. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.